Scoop, I missed you, mate. I couldn't wait any longer. Last year we got to get videos out, I believe, on the 18th of December. We don't know when fantasy is coming out, but I've got so many videos in the schedule for this year, so we got to get started now. And thanks to you, mate, we've got a lot of our general prices. If things are going to spit out the same this year when they do open the game, and I think for the most part we should be getting pretty similar prices to these guys, apart from Matty Nicholson, who does come over from England and may put a little bit of a tough one on Mr. Zach Hosking. But how you been, mate? How's the off season been? Have you freshened up, ready for a lovely new preseason?
Yeah, been good. It's always great to get stuck into a preseason where we forget any struggles we had the last year and knuckle down to see what the heck's going to go on for the next year. It's the numbers season. It's great and we love it every year. But yeah, so I've been going well, getting stuck into some Big Bash as well, which has slowed down this, but it's all good fun. Yeah, so we've got a couple of teams at the moment, and the first one we're having a look at now, the Canberra Raiders. They're I don't know how they'll go this year. It's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely, mate. We're going to go through their predicted sort of starting 17. It looks fairly settled, which is can be a good thing. Last year was pretty all over the shop with plenty of cheapies available, and maybe not as many this year available. But we will go through their draw. We're going to go through their top three guns that I think you could potentially start with based on this draw that we have, which we'll go through. Maybe some of the middies, some of the cheapies as well, and anything else we need to go through for Canberra. So keeping it pretty short and sweet, these team previews, before we get into the weeds, into the certain positions as we get that game open, which will be good fun. So, mate, where do you want to start us? Go through that draw for me, at least for the start of the season.
Well, the I have the draw laid out there with interesting colors. So I have green as bottom four, yellow as sort of the top middle five of the bottom eight. So the 9 to 13 or whatever it is. Uh, Orange is a bit tough as 5 to 8, and then red potentially top four. So you can see a graph down below that of the rough predicted opponent ladder position. Overall, anything over about 10, 11, 12 is looking pretty soft, and anything below 7, 8, 6, 7, 8 is pretty rough. And the Raiders are pretty much indisputably the team with the easiest looking draw. You can see some of those uh, overall average lines hovering very close to that 12 mark. So they have a lot of interesting soft games throughout this season, to be honest. So, as you said, there could be some interesting guns, and it could lift the whole team a couple of points if we're seeing some more attack.
Definitely, mate. And as I mentioned in my rough draw outlook for all the teams, the Raiders don't have a bye all the way through until round 15. And a little bit different this year with the bye situation. It's not 13, 16, and 19, the major buys. It's 12, 15, and 18. And so they actually play that first major buy and the first minor buy, which is pretty interesting for a few of our guns, and might be a reason to actually select them, even if you probably in other seasons you might not look at them. And we have a few of those guys in the top three guns list that I put together, and that's Joe Tapine, Fogarty, and then also Hudson Young. And Young's obviously the one that's a chance of origin, so I've put him at number three. But Tapine, we know that he can have tremendous seasons and very consistent seasons, pretty well averaging in the mid 50s regularly. And then Fogarty last year had a really good season as well and had a couple of injuries as well to slow that down, mate. Is there any is there any world where you could start with Joe Tapine instead of going for some of the more expensive guys like a Payne Haas and Isaiah Yo that a lot of us have looked at and a lot of us have started with to begin seasons?
Well, there is potential for him to go up another level and become, well, he already pretty much is the leader of the pack, but you have uh, Josh Papali'i being further and further away, and he's going to keep stepping up and up. I'd say it's going to depend on how many minutes does Morgan Smithies get because he's eating up a lot of those middle minutes as well. But with a potential for some of these easier games and a fresh run and no risk of origin all the way through to that round 15, he's not a bad shout. I don't know if I'll start him myself, but I don't think I'd shy anyone away from doing it.
Definitely, mate. And hopefully we're not on baby watch this year after, what was it, around 6 or
Oh,
7 last year? You
yeah.
had him, didn't you?
I think I did. I had one or two last year who just disappeared for a week when we didn't know.
Yeah. I definitely think there's a fair bit of merit in it. Yes, a 53.7 average. It's a bit below some of those top guys, but when you've got someone that generally is great injury wise, and you can just lock and load them in that mid position all the way through until that round 15, and maybe you just sell from there
Mm,
to a buy friendly guy. I think there will be people out there that start with him, and I think it's a good decision. Whether it's something I do or not, or yourself,
mm.
might not be the case, but I do think it's a good decision, and we'll
Yeah.
probably separate. A few of those guys are going to be very ownership in an Isaiah Yo or a Haas, and plug and playing a guy that can get up into the 90s and tons, right?
Yeah, well, he is one of those guys who just every now and then will somehow accumulate 90 points in run meters, tackle breaks, and offloads. He's a crazy guy. He can just do that sometimes. The only thing I would pretty much at all have against him having a better year than last year is how much does the return of Corey Horsburgh into their starting 17 change things? If he starts to play big minutes, it could eat into Smithies or Tarpanay. If not, set Tapine out for 55 plus.
Mm. Yeah, he's a very interesting one. And mate, you've got Fogarty in the blue there, and tell us a little bit about where you're at with him. Averaged 52.8 last year, and he had stretches, especially at the beginning of the year, where he was a must own. And if you started with him, you got off to a cracking start.
Yes, he last year kind of did a Sean Johnson from the previous year and had a share of well over 90% of the kick meters. When that changed up a little bit with KO Weeks in the halves instead of Ethan Strange, that dropped back a little bit. And I think he had an injury game as well. So if you take all that out and you assume that it remains consistent, he can go back to scoring nigh on 60. I've put him down at a 56 projection because there's probably going to be some variation. There'll probably be a little bit up and down, but I still think he is a bit underpriced. Maybe not as much as last year, potentially, but there's with Mitch Moses, maybe not kicking goals, depending on how they go with Lomax signing
Yeah.
and Cameron Munster. Which one of those three you pick? If you pick Fogarty, there's a solid chance he comes out on top.
Yeah, another guy that you could plug in all the way through to round 15 if he can get through injury. Obviously, he's a little bit older as well at this point. But that start of the season for the Raiders, they begun so hot for a team that we thought would probably struggle with a lot of cheapies and a lot of fresh guys in the NRL. If they can, with a more settled side, if they can build on that last year or at least start fairly well, and have a consistent sort of 10 to 15 rounds, then he could be a guy that hits that high 50s if he's on the park that whole time. So where
Hmm.
do you see the Raiders this year? Do you think that they'll improve a bit? Obviously, if they can keep their key guys on the park.
I really don't know. See, they've had a few people move or retire,
Mm,
and they've got all these young blokes up and coming. They've got the Carroll Weeks, the Xavier Savages, the Ethan Strangers in the team for a little bit now, and I'm not sure whether that means with an off-season teams will figure them out a little bit, or whether that helps them really push up the ladder. I personally don't have them making the eight, but I it's hard to nail a range down on them because it could be really dependent on how they come out. With this easier draw, I'd probably tend to say a little higher rather than lower in that bottom nine or so. But yeah, it remains to be seen.
yeah, they find ways to win, don't they? So I'm predicting somewhere in that sort of 10, 11 range there for them, and they could push higher if we see sort of all-time seasons from Fogs, from Tarpany, if we see their outside backs, like, even like Timoko is an interesting one that we'll move into the mid range and talk about a few of those guys now in Timoko, in Hosking, and then in Corey Horsburgh as well. But starting with Matt Timoko, mate, I think he has the biggest upside potential of that back five. Just with, as you said
Mm.
there in your discussion points, he only scored 4 tries last year, and we've seen him be a 45 type of guy and have stretches, even 4 or 5 week stretches where he goes into the 50s.
Definitely. He sort of feels like a Jesse Ramian type pick when Ramian's at a lower price. You know he can hit those, maybe not elite gun scores, but score really solidly in your team for a bit of a discount. Don't know whether it's enough for me to put him in my round one side, but as you said, and as I've got there, I reckon there's probably a good 5 points in him.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose you do need. probably look at the beginning run there, and you do
Mm,
have the Warriors who are unsure what they could provide for us. Brisbane, if they come back to some good form, Manly, Newcastle, Cronulla, Para, could be a lot better as well. So it might not be the easiest stretch, but it could be a wait and see and a buy at some
mm,
point in that
yeah.
first eight or so rounds there for sure. But mate, Zach Hosking, he's someone that I've just said I'm going to
Oh,
set and forget, and he's locked into the side this year. But they have a new signing in Matty Nicholson, who's a 21-year-old born in 2003. That's just wild, isn't it? How that
it's not good.
we're getting old, mate. We're getting old. But he comes over and he's a back rower, so
Mm,
he has edge competition, as you've said there. We've got Hudson Young on the other side, who is an Origin player, and Hosking is almost as good in his own way, right? But is there a potential for a bit of minutes risk? Do we still just lock in Hosking if he starts anyway with Nicholson on the bench? How are we thinking of playing this?
I'm very skeptical that Hosking will get 80 minutes, but he scores so well that at his price, I don't know if you can leave him out of your team because if he is in that starting team come round one, because we don't know what the heck Ricky Stewart is going to do with some of these guys, move them around, do all sorts of fun things. And if he comes out and starts hitting 65, 65, 50, 70, and he's priced where we think he's going to be priced, you are going to be down in the dirt like the non-Hosking owners at the start of last season. It that's what he does. That's what he scores. If he gets 80 minutes, like top two fantasy scorers at Edge, surely.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that is the worry with Corey Horsburgh not playing much last year either. He played a bit of edge a couple of years ago. Does he just play solely through the middle? Do they use Nicholson as a 15 to 20 guy off that bench and potentially take the 25 like you've said off Hosking? And yeah, there's a few questions around that, but we have plenty of time to find that out at least. But we know that he is a gun scorer when he gets the opportunity. He's very, very consistent at that. And then Horsburgh, mate, he probably actually he's killed his price a little bit. You'd imagine he does come
Yeah.
out very similar to this average in the price when we do get the prices, guys. This is the expected prices, as we said from the start. So don't take this as gospel until the game comes out. But Horsburgh at a 40.6 average with pretty low minutes last year, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he kind of got into Origin and then he just disappeared off the face of the planet.
Mm.
And he popped back up at the end of last year for a few games, worked into big minutes. I think there were some games where he's getting 50, 55, but with a full team there and a full squad, I don't know if he can get that, especially with the fact that Morgan Smithies is now there compared to the good old days a couple of years back when he was just killing it in the middle at lock.
So
So
good.
I think there is potential for him to go up and down depending on things. But yeah, if there is an injury in the middle somewhere, be on horse watch.
Definitely, mate. And with Matty Nicholson, he is a young fella, so there's not every chance that he 100% chance, sorry, that he actually makes the starting 17. So that's obviously going to be a watch over the preseason. But mate, that nine position, Tom Starling,
Ugh.
Levi, all those guys there, at the prices that we're seeing with the Starling, with a Levi, they'll be, they're not basement price. Is it a position we just leave?
Yeah, Tom Starling every 2 years has a year where he goes and makes 200K and then falls out of relevance again in about 6 weeks. And that year was last year. He had a low enough end to the year that his price should be almost tempting. Like you can't do it. Not priced at over 30.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Mate, with the Raiders, do you see much else that we need to speak about? There's a lot of guys that kind of played themselves up to a pretty solid average last year and don't really have too much value. Or and just remember, guys, with a a checklist, you want to make sure that they have sort of gun potential or potential to make money. And there's a lot of sort of mid tier guys that probably don't have a long way to go on their scoring or their price, do they? With upside.
Yeah, there's a lot of outside backs, especially that aren't quite gun level. Like the only one I would be interested in at all at this stage is Timoko. But other than that, it's pretty much those top three guns, I think, unless Matty Nichols manages to start. I don't think there'll be that much cheapy potential or money making. But I mean, we don't know what he'll be priced as an import. He might be priced at 550K or something like that. So
Nice.
outside of Hosking and Fogarty, I think it's all guns, not much cheapies in the Raiders. But yeah, with their draw, still keep a good eye on them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely some relevance there. I think you can get away with one of the guns and a mid ranger, likely, depending what happens with Matty Nicholson as a cheapie. The only outside back there's maybe like a Xavier Savage if he managed to take a leap this year, priced at a 28 is not that high. If they manage to play pretty well and he can become that sort of 180, 200 meter running wing. Now that he's had he'll have a full preseason there, but I won't hold my breath on that one. I want to see that, I
Mm.
think, before taking any plunge on something like that. Or if he was to lose a bit of, lose a bit of cash and get into a low 20s price, he could be interesting at some
Mm.
point. And Seb Chris just seems to hang around that sort of 30s, doesn't he?
Yeah, I don't know what happened with Seb Chris. He kind of was bad at center and then good at center. And then he scored good at fullback when he was center dual, and then he wasn't, and now he's back at center. So I just think you just leave that roller coaster alone.
And then Huddy Young, mate, we didn't really touch on him too much, but a 53.4 average, probably about what we're going to get from him.
Yeah, I'd expect so. It's a lot of money to start in the edge position at the beginning of the year. Don't know if I would go it, but with that early draw and nothing till around 15, it's not the worst.
Yeah. He just seems to be a little, he can be a little bit inconsistent. I think in the first few rounds last year, he struggled, and then that was the time to buy. I think he got down under a sort of a 46, 45 price point and then
Yeah.
worked his way back to a nice 53 average. So there'll be a few of those guys. It's the knickerers, it's those types of players, hey, that you got to buy them at
Yeah,
the right time because they can
definitely.
go on those try scoring runs. They're freakish type of players, mate. So yeah, I think we'll leave the Canberra Raiders there. I think that was a good little format to do it rather than going through every single one of the depth guys. That's probably the only other the thing, mate, is to mention depth. If we were to lose certain guys in certain positions, is there guys that can come in and take those with some potential for good money making and good scoring from the Raiders? Do you see?
Well, they have a couple of retirements. One of them's been filled by Matty Nichols potentially, and the other is Jordan Rapana. So Chevy Stewart was in and out of the team a little bit. He's still probably going to be pretty cheap if he manages to get in at fullback. He'll probably be worth a look with a lot more experience now in preseason and playing with this team. So I think if he manages to pop up, he'll be good. But yeah, at this stage, I think a lot of those middles who rotate in and off the bench, Ricky's kind of killed their fantasy output because he likes to rotate that bench a bit, whether
Mm.
it's Mariota or Trey Mooney or this, that, and the other. They're all probably like through 50K, and I don't know if there's any real fantasy value there, but they do have decent depth like that.
Oh, he loves forwards, doesn't he? Yeah, it probably
Yeah.
would be that fullback position, and then Ethan Sanders. I'd say if
Hmm.
Fogarty was to go down, we'd see him go into that seven role. Had a couple of decent games last year, but yeah, plenty to come across the preseason once they all get back into contact and all those injuries come, don't they? We the things we're looking at now. It's just good to learn it all, so you know what's to come. If the injury pops up, you know who's coming in next. You know
Hmm.
what to expect from certain guys, just from the from what their pedigree and what that we've seen over the years. So thanks so much, Scoop, for coming on for the Raiders, who I think will be an interesting team somewhere in the middle of the pack. And which Raiders are you going to start with? Let us know in the comments if you're interested in any of them, multiple of them. We'd love to hear from you guys in the comments and all your lovely positive comments for Scoop there every time he comes on.